Okay, perfect. So today we're going to be discussing kind of like the MCAS. A lot of you shared questions, which I answered at the end, but we'll also leave time for you to ask any more questions. So basically, this PowerPoint overall, I wanted to share. So sorry, I'm getting a lot of admits, so I'll just be admitting them as I go.
No
Uh,
worries. I can admit them. I see them
oh,
on
you
my end also.
Okay,
Yes.
so I won't worry about that.
Yeah.
Okay, they're kind of coming in a lot. So I've added a lot of my personal, for example, I've added my personal statement. I added examples of my activities. I added like resources. So at times, if you see me skipping slides, it's because I added for your information, but we don't have time to cover everything. I'll mostly be focusing on how to fill out the AMCAS application and how to do the activities. But I wanted to share all the resources and what I personally did for my application for you to have like in one page, kind of in one slide. So it's very important for you to do the attendance so you can get the slides. So don't worry if I'm skipping slides. It's just because you're going to have a personal statement session next week with Dr. Angel Rosario, and we're planning on doing interviewing later on as well as secondary. So keep an eye on those. Okay, so just a brief overview of the medical school application timeline. So you're going to take your MCAT, you're going to do research shadowing, clinical work. The main material things you should be considering is that a lot of your schools are going to, if you're applying this upcoming cycle, a lot of your schools are going to be having kind of an informational meeting to discuss the committee letter. Not all schools do that, but my school did that. And for that committee letter, they requested us to have kind of like a longer personal statement when they really didn't have any word limits and you kind of just told them about your life. And that's very helpful for them because then they can add personal things to the committee letter they'll write on your behalf. And they'll also ask you about like your activities. And that's great practice to kind of get a head start of the activities you'll do to submit to your AMCAS too. So that is usually done due around like February. But then April to May is really the time you have the opportunity to prepare your AMCAS material, which we're going to be talking about today. In June, it's when it officially opens, and it does take a few weeks to process. That's why a lot of people recommend you having everything done like in advance. So working on it in April and May, so that when it opens, you submit. And you want to submit early because verification sometimes can take 6 to 8 weeks. Personally, for me, it took about around 4 weeks, but I did apply during the COVID cycle, which was a bit unique. And then in your July through September, even sometimes longer, and a rolling scale, they'll send you secondary applications or a rejection. If they send you in secondary applications, we'll talk about what is a secondary later on today. And then after that, the next step will be the interviews. Most of the bulk you'll be having around October, November, but they interview up to February, March even. A lot of schools do rolling admissions and they'll let you know if you're rejected or accepted throughout the cycle, but other schools such as Columbia has an official release date. So for us, I believe it was like March 1st, they told us accepted, waitlisted, or rejected. And then I also added here again, I said I have a lot of resources and links that you can click and have more information in your free time because my goal today is kind of give you a broad overview going into specifics with the activity sections. But for example, if you have more questions about the timeline, we found a great person, May Gao, a medical student who actually talks about this in depth. So I'll share the link there. And then this is just a visual of what we talked about. You can submit it as early, like end of May or June 1st. And then you don't want to leave it till the end because again, it takes time to process and you want to be ahead of the game to ensure, they read your application in time, and you also have to return the secondaries. I'm also adding here another link. So there's sometimes very school specific applications again, this won't apply to you if you apply early. You can add your schools from the beginning, but sometimes maybe you learned about a new school and you want to add it. Some schools have very specific deadlines, so just keep that in mind. But again, I urge you all to try to apply as soon as possible and doing it early June, sorry. And then the AMCAS opens officially around, it changes every year, but early May, and that's when you're actually going to insert all the information that we're about to talk about. So overview of the AMCAS application, again, it's going to be personal information, your coursework, your activities, letter of recommendations, the medical school essays, which is like your personal statements, and then actually adding each medical school. So I'm leaving here too. This is something I used when I was applying at Med School Bros. They have templates of kind of everything in a template format, so you can insert those. Let's say you want to get started now or in January or February before it opens, you can start filling out the information. So when it officially opens in May, you'll just copy and paste and it'll make your life easier, especially for a lot of the, personal statement and the activities that have the word limits. You want to be conscious about that. So here I am actually going to go in depth of each section. And it's going to, the first section is your identifying information, just your legal name, birthday, gender, and pronouns. The next section is the school's attendance. So you are going to provide information about the high school, the college you're attending. They will ask you a question, yes or no, if you ever had institutional action. Your transcripts, I have a slide just dedicated to transcripts, which we will talk about. For your college attendant, I personally went through the application, like I pretended I was going to apply this cycle and I opened it up and these were kind of like the pop-up boxes that came. But you want to make sure like if it says, do you authorize AMCAS to release your application to the school designated advisor, you want to say yes. And then again, it's asking information about the transcript, you want to say yes. And then you can read more information, whether it applies to you here and when you're actually applying. But I just wanted you to kind of get an overview sense of what the MCAS, is composed of, because it is a scary process. So then here you actually go into more of your biographic information, your address, citizenship, legal residence, your race and ethnicity, the languages you speak and how fluent you are. Really, especially if you're a Spanish speaker, please add that. Your primary childhood residence. They ask a lot about this, and you'll learn to discover that a lot of schools have a preference for an in-school or even students who were born in that state. So that's why they ask a lot of these questions. So something I did, like I was born in Jersey. I graduated from high school in Mississippi, but I was living in New York and I wanted to apply to a lot of New York schools. So in my gap years, I paid for taxes in New York City and became like a New York resident by living there. So I put New York State as my kind of like main state because I was applying to a lot of New York states. But a lot of schools don't have in-state preferences, and you can easily research online. I know there's like probably Reddit has a good research of which one has the specific in-state residencies or not, but I'll show you another resource later on too. Other important things, so if you're a military, they ask about misdemeanors and felonies. I'll talk about the other impactful experiences because that's very important. Then you'll add information about your family. This is also very important, like if you're underserved, if you come from a low income household, if you ever had family assistance programs like, food stamps, you would add that there. If you receive scholarships like the Pell Grant, if you have to work before you're 18, all of that is very useful to add. And then another thing, so the other impactful experiences is very important. I personally wrote about that. So you want to write this if you, come from a low income family, if you did work study during college, if you got financial aid, if you're a caretaker of your family, if you came from like a community that had high poverty or high crime rates, if you didn't have access to healthcare, if you were in a very rural area, if you had food scarcity, if there are limited educational opportunities in your hometown, anything like that you want to add here. And a very key aspect here, so keep the tone positive and end on a high note. You don't want to, yes, you need to describe these experiences because it's very meaningful to why you're here today and like perhaps a lot of your goals in medicine. But you always kind of want to add it like here's an example of what I wrote in my application, and I ended it as like, as a first generation college graduate, I hope to be a role model for other minority students aspiring to become physicians. So that was kind of ending on a high note. And this is a short paragraph, so it's like 1,325 characters. And I'll leave this here for you to kind of, if this applies to anyone, and you need an example, this is an example. And then the next session is the coursework. So actually the AAMC has videos on this. So I left a good video if you want to, it's always scary when you don't know what to expect. But if you watch a video of everything you're going to fill out, it makes it less scary. And this is an example, but you are going to physically add every coursework you did in college, as well as any of my high school, back in high school, if you took college level courses, you will add that too. And if you have any very specific questions, like feel free to reach out to your med school advisors. They know a lot about the coursework. Like it'll ask you a course classification. Maybe you don't know. You can go here to the AMCAS applicant guide or ask your advisor if you're confused with questions like that. And then the infamous or famous works and activities, it stresses a lot of students out. But that's why I recommend the template I shared a few slides back, because you want to keep track on like your start date, your end dates. If it's still going, there's an option to, say you're still involved in it, kind of how many hours you were involved with. So you have to calculate all of that. You also want to put the experience type, the name, and you also are going to put contact information. So you might, if you want to give those persons a heads up. My pre-med advisor told us if there was anything specific, like maybe a hobby or a conference attended that you really didn't have a contact information for, you could actually put them as contact. So I will ask your pre-med advisors about that. Now we're going to get to the good stuff, how to write, what types of activities, etc. So keep in mind, very brief, 700 characters, and only you can add up to 15 activities, and only 3 are most meaningful, and those you get an extra 1,325 characters. So my biggest tip is that you want to keep it very holistic. So you want to have, kind of give them a taste of your life, of all the experiences you've done. So you can do clinical experience, your research, your leadership, community service. But I also talked about hobbies. Like I played the violin. I did it in college, but I did it from 6th grade to, 12th grade. So I added that. Anything that you think you would want the admissions team to know, or anything that makes you excited or that you're passionate about, because a lot of these things come up in your interview, so you really want to add those things. And just keep in mind anything that makes you unique, anything you're proud of. And again, when selecting the most meaningful, I would recommend something perhaps you dedicated a lot of time with, or maybe you co-founded an organization you're very passionate about. I know a lot of you probably created the LMSA Plus chapters. That's something great you can add. Or maybe you published a paper, you wrote an abstract or presented in a conference. You can overall talk about your research experience. And another good tip is whenever possible, you want to quantify accomplishment. So if you were the leader of a service mission trip somewhere, you can say like, you served as the leader of 13 students who went to this trip. Or if you volunteered and you collected funds for a local shelter, you can say, we raised $5,000 for this shelter. These are all just examples, but that's what I mean with quantify. And you can see I didn't do it for all my activities, but when they were applicable, I added those. So yeah, in a lot of interviews, again, they talked a lot about experiences, and I also added my previous jobs. Like I, in high school, worked as a secretary, and throughout college, worked as a waitress, and they were very excited about that. Why? Because you already have a job experience. So, you learn a lot of skills that are applicable in the medical field, working in a team, being a leader, delegating tasks. All of those are super important. Leadership skills, right? Everything that you might not see a connection to medicine, but there's things that, can really emphasize. And it just makes you unique and people want to talk about that. And they're also a part of your journey. So don't be afraid to shy away from talking about those experiences. So this is my first activity and this was research. So here's my example, and I also highlighted things. So here I'll just talk through a few of these since I'm gonna keep an eye on the time. 7:22. Okay. So I systemically reviewed the literature. So here what did you do? I'm answering specific roles I played. I also conducted personalized interviews. I inputted data. I also had weekly lab meetings. And then why did you do it, right? So I enjoyed connecting clinical research to positive health outcomes, right? What did you learn? I learned that you can apply science directly to people through clinical research. And then maybe I always like to end it like, what do I see in my future? Does it include research or not? So for me, it did. So I was like, I want to help others understand their health through research. Um, in this section too, or even in your most meaningful, you can add like, if you were a first author, if you submitted a publication. But I also have a section where I combine some of the publications I already did, kind of to save space in those 15 activities you're allotted. This is another research experience, kind of like from another angle where I try to do more of the showing and not telling. So this is what I mean. So as I finished my first nasal lavage procedure, 6-year-old Maria exclaimed, "Mommy, I want to be a doctor like her." I told her I was not a doctor, but if we both studied hard, we could become doctors. Every child participant I met had a different living environment, some safer than others. I learned how fighting disparities, again here, what did this experience teach you? I learned that how fighting health disparities extends beyond the scope of personal interactions and impacts communities at large through multi-center studies across the country. And then what do you want to highlight? So this for me is like, this experience has motivated me to work towards providing marginalized communities or underserved communities access to care through advancement in scientific inquiry and clinical research, while inspiring minority children to pursue this career as well. So for me, I'm very passionate about working in underserved communities. And overall, you have to remember that your application is telling or showing a story about you. And the schools, as they're reading about you, they're also thinking, are you a good fit for their medical school, and if you really want to work with underserved communities, you kind of want to highlight that through the experiences you already did. Most meaningful, so now you have more characters, and here's where I kind of put more emphasis on, again, the research experience. So I found this study intriguing as it is recommended by the CDC for children to exercise, My role allowed me to serve a vulnerable population, many of who were learning how to navigate the healthcare system for the first time. While performing an allergy skin test, I found it was Anna's first time getting this test. To calm her down, I reassured her that the test did not hurt. She laughed as she saw that it did not hurt me, so I actually did an example of that. And you can see how kind of telling a story. So this is where when you hear a lot of the show don't tell, and we'll repeat this a lot because you want to, you know, kind of make it interesting. You'll see when you submit your application, it all becomes a blurs. It's like a lot of words and lines, and your admissions team is reading a lot of applications. So the more you can kind of show what you're passionate about or the experiences you did, the more you can connect perhaps with your readers or kind of attract their attention. I realized that research can create a safe space in the pipeline to access care. And for me, I was very particular. I wanted to apply to Columbia. Columbia was the first choice for me because of the Washington Heights community of predominantly Spanish speaker. So here I was emphasizing here. We also see participants from around the world, oftentimes recent immigrants who only speak Spanish. A family from the Dominican Republic informed us the steroid medications were over the counter, unlike in the US. Dr. X, my mentor, informed the mother that the medication should be limited as it can contribute to weight gain and affect growth. So I learned that a physician can empower families through health literacy. So that's kind of like, what did I learn and my why? I am motivated to become a doctor that combines research, epidemiology, and patient interactions to provide care to underserved populations. You can kind of see my mission statement, even as I'm applying to residency, that's kind of like my bread and butter. I'm really passionate about being in a community who helps underserved, or being in a hospital that serves underserved populations. Another activity, so I didn't only do research, I also was a TA. A TA, or like if you were teaching, or you a mentor, very important, because you still do teaching and mentorship as a future doctor, as a medical student. What am I doing today? Mentoring. So if you have those experiences, I would highlight. A lot of you also come from taking growth years, or had a job, or more before before undergrad. You can talk about that too, or if you had a career before medicine. So during my first semester as a teaching assistant for science of psychology, John was the last of 30 students to visit me during office hours. So here I'm quantifying, I was in charge of 30 students at a time, or 30 students came to my office hours. Devastated that he failed his first exam, I encouraged him to not let his first score demoralize him. Because of his and other struggles, I decided to increase my office hours and told him to come every week. So my commitment was to hold it like every 2 weeks, but I was passionate about this and I wanted to do it every week. So here I'm showing like how I'm flexible, how I'm adaptable, maybe how I'm compassionate, how I'm innovative. Instead of having him simply memorize the terms being tested, I want him to learn the terms' significance and connect it to his life. I discovered he was a visual learner, so I incorporated videos and flowcharts and advised him to learn the information through themes and outlines. So here I'm showing how I take initiative. This is the skill of a leader, of a future doctor, how I'm innovative. And then, I'm just trying to paint a picture, and I have a slide of all the traits that the AMCAS or the AAMC like emphasizes are good traits to have as a doctor. And you can kind of go through those and see what you want to incorporate, or see what reflects to you as something you're passionate about. I'll skip this for time and we can come back, but again, it's available for you to see. But I, again, wanted to do more of the storytelling, so I began with a scenario. I connected to the medicine whenever possible. So here, similar to medicine, teaching consists of breaking down complex terms into simpler examples. So if you think of yourself as a future doctor or as a future medical student in the healthcare system, you can see yourself having to teach your patients what is high blood pressure, why are we giving them this medication. So if you have teaching experiences, it's super great to include. Volunteer. So again, I won't go into depth, but here you can see another interaction, and I was again telling a story. And here volunteer at a free clinic as a Spanish interpreter. Again, I'm telling a story, but in it, I'm always trying to connect it, right? Like to my mission statement, to why I want to become a physician. So here I wanted to highlight, as a Spanish interpreter, my perspective allowed me to have an active, necessary role that encouraged patients like Jose to feel calm and open up. This experience taught me the importance of language concordant care and attentive listening to patient needs. I learned, again, what did you learn from the experience? I learned that medicine unifies the science of healing and the respect of individuals' patients' needs. Here I was another volunteer, and here I want to highlight more of like, when you want to quantify. So we obtained the $5,000 grant. So you want to add those quantities if you know about it, whenever possible. And again, I always try to connect it to my why medicine, or my why I want to help underserved populations. So this was actually volunteering for Habitat for Humanities. So you're saying like no connection to medicine, right? But I incorporated this experience as well as my research in asthma, because overall they're focusing on how we can combat healthcare disparities in different levels, right? Not only on the individual clinical level, you can do it through research, you can do it as a volunteer, you can do it as an advocate. So then I was a co-founder for this thing during COVID, and I wanted to add that. So here, where you see the X is like how many patients we connected, how many actual volunteers we had, and how many we trained. Again, trying to quantify. So what other types of activities you can include? Again, your jobs, hobbies, very important. Be unique, be authentic. A lot of people were very interested in, I mentioned like I enjoy like fitness classes, or I enjoyed cooking, and I would be specific, like I like cooking ceviche. It helps me stay in touch with my Ecuadorian roots. Or I like dancing salsa, like it's a way I, cope with stress or prevents me from burning out. Because again, the your career as a doctor is going to be very draining, and you're going to see through interview questions, or even secondaries, they're going to ask like, well, how do you deal with stress? How do you stay organized? You can kind of get ahead of those type of questions by incorporating them in the types of activities you do. And some of my interviews actually started, well, like, tell me more about like your cooking, or tell me more about this activity you did. You also can combine honors. I actually combine all of mine under one to save activities, space for something else. Here I added an example of how I combine two publications in one, activity section. And then the next stage, letter of recommendation. So we're gonna leave questions to the end to make sure we get through it. But remind me, Catherine, when do you want me to stop and do questions?
Yeah, we can stop around like 7:45 is good.
Okay,
15
so
minutes for
we're going
questions.
good because I got through the difficult section, which was the activity. So
Yes,
we're good on
definitely.
time. Letter of recommendations. Again, this is a very good video. I was literally on AMCAS, like I'm applying. What would I do if I was in your shoes now? And I actually got linked to all these videos. So very important to, watch them if you feel nervous and kind of get ahead. You see, they're going to ask a lot of information from your letter writers. And I have actually information on how to ask those letters and a template too. So who do you ask? You should check your school requirements. I personally did only one science class. I did a humanities class because I really connected with that professor. I did my research mentor, and I did my extracurricular activity, which was the Spanish interpreter at the free clinic. So I asked an attending to write that letter. And I would try to get letters from professors and doctors who know you well. You did research for 3 years. Definitely ask that mentor. Or you were a volunteer for 2 years. Ask that attending at that clinic, or maybe in the clinic director, whoever you have a close relationship with. It's a little harder with professors. You can kind of gauge if you really enjoyed the class, you know, um, I would ask whoever you connected with. If you didn't connect and you have to have, that science requirement letter, I felt like I didn't really connect with my science professors. I just cold email. They still wrote a letter. No one said anything about it. You get it done. But I think one tip, and we'll talk about it in the next slide, that really helped me kind of get more personalized letters. When do you ask? So if you really had a great experience and you want to put it on their radar, you can, ask them either in person or via email at the end of the semester. Hey, like I really enjoyed your class. I learned so much. Do you think it would be possible for you to write me always add a strong letter of recommendation? And then you're like, okay, I'll remind you, I'll send an email and also remind you once it gets closer to the application. Or I personally, I am a procrastinator. So I did all of mine as I was doing my cycle. And I actually, one of the, professors I asked moved institutions. It was still fine. I found his email and I still asked him for a letter. Another professor never wrote back, and I never, I just didn't find any contact information. It was as if the professor disappeared from the earth. And I just moved on. So that's why it's really important to think about this in advance. And you want to give them several weeks in advance. I would recommend 2 months. At the least a month in advance. They're getting tons of requests. So, you want to do everything that makes you have makes this process easier. And you're already taking the first step by being here. So congrats to everyone. And then, how do you ask? Or here's another who to ask. You can read this. It's kind of like community leaders, your mentors, etc. How to ask. This is where you get very nervous. Don't worry. The worst they can say is no, and you move on. That's why it's super important. I would even start asking 3 months in advance. So, the whole cycle around June, and maybe asking around February, March. You're already going to be in the mindset of working on your personal statement, working on activities. So we'll start with the letter recommendation writers too. I asked all of mine via email. So don't be pressured that you didn't ask in person. The things that really helped me is that I sent them personal statement, my CV or resume, and even if your personal statement's like in its draft, like whatever draft you can, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just whatever you want to emphasize, because they can, they can quote things from your personal statement and add that in their letter. And something a letter writer asked me to do was put 3 things or 3 moments that I was proud of. And that was a really good, reflective activity to do. And then people were quoting, my interviewers were like, wow, your writer wrote about this. So very nice, Now I do that for all my letter writers. When I did for residency, I kind of just made a document, of my 3 top moments and kind of activities. So if it was a clinical setting that you're asking the letter writer to write from, add those specific patient interactions. They're not going to remember, and they're also not going to remember from your point of view. So add that. If it's community service, highlight the specific tasks and roles you did. If it's research, highlight what you learn, what you hope to do, the abstracts, publications you publish. If it was your TA, add those specific, whatever you're going to write anyways for the activity section, add that for them, If it's a class, maybe something you learn, you don't really have to worry. It's a little different, difficult maybe to think of for those science classes or those humanities classes. So maybe just include your top 3 moments you're proud of overall, in your life. For me, for example, it was getting a scholarship, the Questbridge scholarship for college. That was a really proud moment. And you also, in that whole email, so you're adding the CV, you're adding a personal statement, you're adding this little document you created with experiences. You also want to provide your AAMC ID and your AMCAS ID. So when you do the application, it'll pop up. If you don't have it yet, tell them you'll follow up, okay? And then there's a video on more specific. And you also want to kind of give them instructions. And in that video, in this second link, you can see different links of what you can send to your letter writers. And here, for sake of time, I won't do this, but this is a blog and this is what the example, if you want a template. I was always very nervous about my grammar and how it sounds. So I always try to look for templates. The fees, you can read this later, $175 for the school, $46 for additional schools. But if you do or identify as low income, I would urge you to apply for financial assistance. It gave me I applied for free for 20 schools. That's $1,000 value. And they gave me my MCAT, I think it was reduced, but all the MCAT prep was free, okay? So click on this link, see if you apply, and apply very early because it takes time. Preparing for the MCAT, there's going to be a whole separate section, so I'll skip. But my biggest tip is I love UWorld. So yeah, if I would invest in a resource, it would be UWorld. Personal statement, again, you're going to have a whole session on this next week, so I'm going to skip it. But my biggest tip is show, do not tell. Reflect on why you want to become a physician. What are your future goals? And include key experiences. I'm leaving you with mine. that you can read in your free time. Here's the competencies I mentioned. So whenever you're, you're writing your activities and you're writing your personal statement, try to go through these. So some I identify with is reliability, resilience. I'm service oriented. I love working in teams. And you could see through my activities and you'll read my personal statement how I emphasize these over and over again. How to select schools. You want to consider location. Do you see yourself living there? Curriculum style. Like Columbia, for example, is 1.5 years of preclinical. Some schools do 2, others do 1. So how fast do you want to learn, a preclinical? For example, when do they take board exams? I took step 1 and 2 in my 3rd to 4th year. Other schools take it before clinical year and then after. So just start thinking about those. Mission alignment is the biggest thing. Do you, if you want to serve underserved communities, does the school offer a free clinic that you can serve on? Are they passionate about serving the community? What are the extracurriculars you can do? And you also, as your strategy for your application list, you want to do your dream schools, always dream high, apply. You don't lose, maybe $100, apply, dream high. A target schools, this is your bulk of the schools where you can see yourself, being. And then safety schools, mean you think you're a better candidate, but you still want to have a balance of all of those. Always vibe checks too. And you'll get that through the interviews. So here's a great link. MSAR, it is paid, but if you get the financial assistance program, you get this for free, but it kind of highlights each school, the average MCAT scores, the average GPA, et cetera, et cetera. And then go to each school's website and like I have here, sorry, you might see, don't get scared. You're going to see a lot of links, okay? A lot of tabs. But go here to the MD program. You want to read the values of the schools, right? You also want to read their kind of their curriculum, admissions, how to apply. It tells you everything, the different programs they have. You see the different types of tracks they have. And this is really good because you can bring specific questions to the interview and you can also, I'll talk about it here. I'm going to go back here. I can come back. Let me go. Okay, I'll keep in order. But why Columbia for me? So the community, the free clinics and extracurriculars, and I can talk more about Columbia if you have questions. The application tracker, it's very scary. This is the tracker I used. I shared this. You might have to request me for access. I'll add anyone who wants it and then just make a copy and do your own things. But I'm very organized with this. So I just add like the schools, the portals, your username and password because you're gonna forget. And then I kind of just kept track, like, did I submit the application? Did I submit the secondary? Did I pre-write the secondaries, et cetera, and kind of kept dates and then accepted, rejected, waitlisted, et cetera. Secondary applications, we'll have a session of this, but super important to think about them. After you submit your primary, start pre-writing them. You're gonna have like a month until your primary is being processed. You wanna submit within 2 weeks. Don't make the mistake I did. I still got in, but it took me a month to just write my Columbia one because I was so nervous. So if you pre-write, you'll be less nervous. And here's like prompts of all the schools and the prompts they have asked in the past. So go to this website. And then I wrote here on gap years, here's my example. If you want to read that. Interview process, again, we'll have a different session, but we'll just wanted to prime you to it. And again, resources on the types of interview questions they ask. And just to finish off, there's going to be a lot. Make sure to send thank you notes after you do your interviews. You can send an update letter and letter of interest if you either have updates to provide, maybe you publish something and you want them to know, or if you're like really want an interview and you haven't received an interview, I would start sending those letters of interest. And also understand that it's rolling admissions and everybody has different acceptance timelines. Here's an example of a letter of interest if you want to learn more. And this blog also goes in depth on like where and when to send them. And yeah, as you're making your decisions where to attend, ask current medical students. That was my biggest tip, especially if they're alumni from your undergraduate, because then you can ask like, how was that transition? And also go to social hours or second look days if it's possible. And last slide, I'm good on time, just 2 minutes late. Start early, stay organized, use the tracker if you need to, be authentic in all parts of the application. Seek feedback on your essays. I had like 10 drafts. I asked like my college best friends. I went to the writing center a lot. So if your school has a writing center, use that. I asked my mentors, anyone who wants to read it, especially English majors, because they just have a different mind than us science folks. So good to have a broad perspective, even like your English professor. Practice self-care throughout the process. So please always prioritize your, physical and mental health well-being, and still do your activities. Yep, and that's all. And these are resources you can reach out. And as always, you can also reach out to me. So, and there's my email. These are the questions that people submitted in advance, and I kind of answered them all, but I'll answer the questions of you guys here because you can read this later on.
Okay, thank you, Kim, for that amazing in-depth presentation. I know I got a lot of tips for that myself when I'll be applying. So thank you for providing all of those resources and your own personal work activities.